This is Zudi Jasser, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Muslim Reform Movement. We'd like to welcome you to our webinar today on the occasion of International Women's Day. And we thought there'd be no better subject than to talk about overcoming barriers, a Muslim woman's perspective. And what we want to talk about is, I want to introduce you to some of our co-founders of the Muslim Reform Movement and go into some of the barriers that continue to exist and have existed for a long time as a result of the Islamist establishment. We're going to have with us today Zeerah Nomani. Zeerah is an American author and former Georgetown University professor. She's also a co-founder of the Muslim Reform Movement. She's co-director of the Pearl Project and the author of Standing Alone, an American Muslim women's struggle for the soul of Islam. And hopefully Raheel Raza, when she joins us, I'll introduce her. And Soraya Dean is with us. She is a lawyer, an award-winning international activist, and a community organizer. She's the founder of the Muslim Women's Speakers Bureau. Thank you for joining us, Soraya, Zeerah, and Raheel Raza. Thank you.
Thank you.
Raheel Raza, another co-founder, will be joining us. Hopefully, she was with us in the green room area, but fell off, which was why we had a pause there initially. But we'll go ahead and get started. For too long, Muslim voices of reform have been marginalized by the Islamist establishment. Our Muslim Reform Movement is a growing platform of genuine reform-minded voices of change from within our Muslim communities. In this webinar, our panelists are going to discuss how they see Muslims overcoming so many of the barriers that exist against the empowerment of women. In this live webinar, our well-known reform-minded Muslim leaders are going to give us a little insight into what exactly those barriers are. And I think by the end of it, in half an hour, you're going to realize why the Muslim Brotherhood groups are so afraid of them. And as we start, we thought about this last week when we were talking offline. We saw one of the Islamists that has been chosen by the Biden administration. She's a deputy in the State Department, a deputy spokesperson. Her name is Samina Fazili. And all of a sudden, all over the internet, you saw her picture wearing a hijab and identified by all the Islamists as being an active Muslim who they're so proud of because she appeared at the days in the White House giving a press conference. Now, nothing to take away the work that she's done, but nothing in the descriptions about her being there described why she was there, what the issues were, what the ideas were, the work she had done, what her agenda was. No, it was just the fact that she was a pictured human being wearing a hijab and identifiably Muslim. So all of us were quite upset with that because really, as our Muslim Reform Movement talks about, we talk about free speech, freedom of religion, and other things. And the key is our ideas. Diversity is about ideological diversity, not about what's around your head, but what's inside your head. And right now, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Zeerah to weigh in on this. And what we're going to do is, as we talk about the barriers, that exist to the engagement of women and overcoming those barriers, we're going to look at a couple areas: the family and tribal situations, theological barriers in Sharia, political and governmental barriers, institutional barriers in media and academia, and last, economic and business barriers. And we'll get to all of those sort of intermittently as we go throughout. And last, before I give it to Zeerah, I want to introduce Raheel. Raheel Raza is president of the Council of Muslims Facing Tomorrow. She's a founding member of the Muslim Reform Movement, director of the Forum for Learning, an award-winning journalist and public speaker. She's advocate for human rights, gender equality, and dignity and diversity. Welcome, Raheel. So, Zeerah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, welcome to everyone. So happy to be here. I just want you all to know that this is what Muslim feminists look like, and I'm going to add Zudi into that illustrious category. There is a phenomena known as Islamic feminism, and you're looking at it. It's not a contradiction in terms, it's a reality, and we all live it every single day. One of the really important issues for me is the idea of freedom and the idea to live free with your hair blowing in the wind, your ability to move anywhere you want. And unfortunately, what the Muslim Brotherhood and their like-minded people who believe in political Islam have put forward in the world is this idea that a Muslim woman is defined by her hijab, this word that's been used to mean a scarf that covers our hair, but nowhere in the Quran is that word ever used that way. And the way that hijab is used in the Quran is as a barrier. So everything that Zuthi set out that we want to talk about today, the barriers that we face and the ways that we overcome those barriers, is defined by that word. And so when Zuthi mentioned that this article was published by one of the Islamist sympathizers here in the United States, he wrote that this woman was a hijab-wearing Muslim woman. So we are reduced to this cloth on our heads so often. And what we fight for in the Muslim reform movement is the ability for a woman to live free. The choices that she wants to make, of course, she can make the choice to cover her hair, but we argue adamantly that a woman is not required to cover her hair. And why does that matter? Because ultimately, the concept of separation and barrier is used as a mechanism to keep us from participation in the mosque, in the public square, in jobs, in schools, in family space, in law. And so that's why it's so important as a symbol to fight this kind of concept of barriers. And I'm so happy to be here with folks who do this every single day. And so thank you so much for having the conversation with all of us, everyone who's watching.
Thank you, Ezra. Thank you, Ezra. And Raheel, you know, I think it's good to divide sometimes the subject of barriers into those barriers internally within our community and those externally. If you listen to just the Islamists, you think that all the barriers are related to bigotry and victimization, and that our entire identity as men or women is given to us by the attention we get from the West. And yet, internally, you were talking to us about data regarding violence, rights, and other things. And how are women doing internally within Muslim communities?
That's an excellent question, Zuthi, and thank you all for being here. Happy Women's Day. Asra, I want to pick up on what you said about freedoms. You know, it is such a basic right that even animals have freedom. And yet we see that there are women in some parts of the world who don't have the freedom to move around the way that animals do. And the perfect example of that is Iran. You know, you're talking about the head covering where women are whipped and lashed and punished and jailed and sometimes tortured for not covering their hair. So this forcible way of, you know, the patriarchy that exists, of course, is one of the biggest barriers internally for Muslim women, especially in countries where there are totalitarian regimes, where, you know, the theocrats rule. It is a man's world. And I don't mean that, you know, relating to all men, but I'm talking about Islamists. You know, they are pure, thorough patriarchy. You know, they are the ones who decide what women should wear, what they should not wear, where they should go, what they should say. So within the Muslim world, the barriers that we face from the patriarchy of the Islamists and others, and then it gets embedded into a sort of a cultural phenomena, sometimes using religion as an excuse. And the biggest barrier for Muslim women has been the fact that religion has been used as an excuse to justify so many injustices against women. So within the Muslim world, this is the problem. And then, of course, in the larger non-Muslim world we're talking about, there is getting into the Islamists, the appeasement of the Islamists, the unquestioning acceptance that somehow the Islamists are right, and not reaching out to us. What I find really, really ironic, and Asra, you and Soraya both have experienced this, it'll be an issue of women's rights, yet they'll go to the mullah in the mosque to answer the question. They will go to the Islamists, and this is our mainstream media I'm talking about. They won't come to us, who are the Muslim women who are facing these issues, and they will ask them to answer questions regarding women and women's rights. And it's as though we don't have a voice. And that, for me, is the most important thing. This International Women's Day is that we have a voice and we have an opinion, and we'd like to express it very clearly.
Thank you, Raheel. And I think, Soraya, if you look at the patriarchal problem, some of the Islamists will just dismiss it as saying, oh, it's just tribalism, it's being uneducated, etc. When in fact, I'm a doctor, so I like to treat the disease. Symptoms might be tribalism, the symptoms might be misogyny, but the cause, I think the primary cancer is political Islam and the power supremacism of the Sharia law that they invoke. How do you think, what is up with this sort of dismissal of the Islamists saying, oh, it's just the tribalism and uneducated, Islam gives women equal rights? Is that a reality, or are they trying to deceive the West?
Thank you, Zudi, and thank you, everybody. This kind of panel really energizes me. It is only through us coming together we can democratize and popularize what we are talking here, not only to ourselves and fellow Muslims, but to non-Muslims who are really surprised at the stagnation of what's happening in the world today. So one of the things I always say is more women need to stand up. And women in the West have failed in this category over and over again. I think the regressive left has contributed to this. Today we know that this is a radical act to separate patriarchy from the theology that the Islamists have spread. They are undoubtedly the super spreaders of sexism and patriarchy in the world today. And let us really make a note of this. And then women have been relegated into this secondary position of benefactors of the faith. And the men have become the recipients. And crumbs of dignity been accorded to women. And I work not only in the United States, in Nigeria, in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. And this is a universal tragedy. And I always say the most richest place in the is where Muslim women are buried, hidden with their talents, gifts, and abilities. Destroyed and disseminated by the patriarchy, disempowered by the patriarchy. So, and the saddest thing is this exclusion is taking place in a righteous way that we are not catching it up strong enough, except for a few of us in the reform movement. It is done in the name of the religion. So getting more women to join the movement is very critical for us to break that, to enlighten, to highlight that collective consciousness, to really break down the barriers. Because today, patriarchy is state-sponsored. It's state-sponsored in many of the Islamist countries. So we have to really watch this. And as Azra said, and it's slowly creeping into the Western world. Are we going to watch this anymore? What are we going to do?
Yeah, you know, I'm just reminded of standing in Toronto praying behind Raheel. It was some years ago, Raheel, if you remember, and we challenged this idea within Islam that there can be no woman as an imam, a prayer leader to men and women in congregation. But I prayed behind Raheel, and I was so happy to pray shoulder to shoulder with, you know, my fellow Muslims of all, you know, nationalities. And we were standing, men and women together. And, you know, it's that separation that hijab is become in our society. And what do we have today? We have women from this organization called Code Pink going on spring break vacations to Iran with their pink scarves to celebrate, you know, this cultural appropriation that they're so proud of throwing on their Facebook pages, in their photo galleries, without any acknowledgement of the failure of the Iranian regime to give women actual rights that allow them to live with the freedom to feel the wind in their hair. And so that's the paradox that the West has got related to these issues of women's rights, while they're, you know, turning International Women's Day into a holiday. They are part of the problem, unfortunately. And so we have to force that kind of honesty and recognition of their duplicity on these issues.
And
course,
Ezra, one of
you know, this,
go ahead.
Sorry. I just wanted to mention in relation to what Asra has said, that even movements like the Me Too movement, yes, they brought forth a lot of the issues about sexual abuse, but were they addressing female genital mutilation? Were they addressing honor killings? Were they addressing forced and underage marriage in Muslim majority societies? No. So one of the other huge barriers is the taboo to speak about the real issues. To me, it's not enough to go on rallies and marches. It's important that we attack head on the issues that are taking place as we speak.
And
I think,
in order to have I was just going to say, to have moral congruence is so, isn't it just like a group of women, Zuthi, on International Women's Day to talk over you? It's just so critical. I want everyone that's listening to hear to always have moral congruence. Like, if you believe that these are rights that women in Western society should enjoy, allow it for all women, including women in Muslim communities.
And I think one of the things that many people ask me about is, you see from the Bush administration to the Obama, Bush administration had a women's project in Afghanistan they spent a lot of time on. Obama administration claimed to give lip service to women's rights across Africa and elsewhere. And yet at the end of the day, it was almost like a bigotry of low expectations. And what do I mean by that? Zeerah talks about frequently about sort of changing the lexicon, where Islamists actually say that women's rights are equal to men, and they come equally from God, not that they're given to them from men, that they have rights that are given from a man, but rather from God, and that we are equal. How do you see us getting rid of this bigotry of low expectations that the West has? France is starting to finally deal with it, where they make mosques and imams accountable for a charter that talks about equality of all. Do you think the United States will ever get there, and will we begin to shed this bigotry of low expectations when it comes to the role of women? Remember, actually, Ezra, remember when we went to the mosque, when Obama visited that mosque in Baltimore, and it's a mosque in which women were always behind the curtain. And just when President Obama visited, they put the curtain down and pretended that somehow they were equal. And you were all protesting at the time in front of the mosque with your signs saying, this is a farce. This is not the way the mosque is every other day of the year. It's just pretending to have women at the front of the mosque now with the president because he's visiting, and they're putting on this show. Or you have the prime minister in Canada who refers to the system of stairs in sort of passing when they're behind a curtain and they don't even have a face, which Raheel has talked about before.
Yeah. And I think that'll be a long march, Zuthi. When women everywhere have reached some level of equality, in the Muslim world, we don't have equality and equity. Muslim women who have been deprived for centuries, we need equity. And then look at what happened just 2 days ago. The Pope goes to Iraq and they talk about everything but gender, which is a huge vacuum in the Muslim world. Because if we women, we were in the forefront with scholarship and leadership opportunities, we would have addressed the issue of extremism far superior to what is happening today. We would have raised a generation of youth who would be productive citizens and engaged in civic activities and leadership and community service. If you walk into a mosque today, what do you hear? An outdated hadith and a sermon for 1 hour about an outdated hadith. And I think it's a long march, and my whole goal is to mobilize women. We have to claim this space for us. And freedom and justice and equity and equality will not be given to us on a platter. Yeah, Azra.
Yeah, and I want to just say that, I prayed behind Raheel. Just the act of her leading in prayer was revolutionary. What Zeerah is doing, this Muslim Women's Speakers Tour, you all might be familiar with it. You might think, oh, that's, normal. But there's a word in our Muslim community, and it's aura. And aura is the word used for that which is forbidden. And so what these Islamists do is they decide that our hair is forbidden, our voice is forbidden, even the the little jingle of bracelets, bangles. See, Zeerah knows that he's lived with it. Like Raheel, Zeerah, and I can talk to you, and then Zuthi through the stories of his own, the women that he's seen in his family. every bit of our movement, if you can imagine, that's why it says every strand of our hair is limited. And what does that do? It diminishes us. It, like Zeerah says, it silences us. And so her act of creating the speakers tour is revolutionary, because it says our voices are not forbidden, and we refuse that idea. And so that's why the power of the word is so amazing.
And then also, Azra, to make it really clear, we are talking about the true Islam here. You know, we belong to a progeny of Khadija, who was a businesswoman. What has happened today? You know, women's leadership is stifled, and the men are engaged in anything but empowering the women. So this is highlighting the Islam of 1400 years ago, where women were in leadership positions.
Right, except I will say that in front of, by my mosque, I was just going to say, outside that mosque in which Obama stood was my father, who is so proud to call himself a feminist. And Rahil's husband was beside me in the row, praying behind his wife. And that's what we require, is folks like Zudi, who are these Muslim feminists that are the men in our communities.
And that is there. We have some great support from our feminist men. But, you know, you talked about barriers. I think one of the obstacles that we face living in the Western world as feminist Muslim women is the appeasement of our leadership, of our Western leadership and our political leadership to the Islamists. You know, there is any time we try to open a door, it slams shut on our face because of this unnecessary appeasement and unreasonable accommodation. So, for example, you know, Sharia courts. I mean, in Ontario, where I live in Canada, we fought long and hard for 1 year to stop Sharia to be, you know, implemented as a parallel set of laws. But you look across the pond, and in the United Kingdom, 83 Sharia courts councils are operating and with the blessing of the government. 83 Sharia councils. And these Sharia councils are all run by men, mostly, 99%. And they are performing marriages without registering them in the UK courts, as a result of which women, Muslim women, are not getting any rights. They are left in a loop. I know this because I have gone to give testimony in the UK Parliament against this. And I know those women, those victims, we've spoken to them. So when the governments of the countries that we live in don't support our voices as Muslim feminists, we have our back up against the wall.
And I would just add to that, I think if you look at, for example, the FGM case in Detroit that fell apart, had so much evidence that the Bureau had, and it ultimately fell apart because the state did not have a law banning it. And ultimately, the federal law did not trump, according to the actually conservative judge in Detroit, did not trump that. And ultimately, the law that was made in Michigan was made too late after the crimes were committed. So having said that, what we need to do is we need to get a critical mass of feminists, be it men or women, activated into the streets to expose the problems behind FGM, behind honor violence that happens here in the West, behind the fact that women in Sharia courts get a quarter of the inheritance, a half of the vote of men. These are realities that are happening in America, in the West, and are not only relevant to women here, but a quarter of the world's population is Muslim. And as all of you have been saying, in Muslim majority countries, it's even 100 times worse. So how do we activate the West not to just care about the political partisanship, but rather, I mean, if there's any issue that could begin to fix political Islamist dominance and supremacy, would be women's rights. They would melt away. If you look at the Brotherhood in Egypt, when they ran the government there for a year and a half, there were hardly any women leading. It quickly exposes, once feminists get activated, it exposes their misogyny and the theocracy of political Islam. How do we get people watching now to begin to actually push this issue in March, like they do for Black Lives Matter and other things that are on the top of the agenda in the West?
I think to whom much is given, much is expected. And those of us in the West, we have guaranteed freedoms here that that most countries don't enjoy, most women in those countries enjoy. Let us start at a very micro level. I think interfaith dialogue has become a redundant thing nowadays, you know. I call upon people who engage in interfaith dialogue, question each other's theology. It's very important. Ask, why is it that FGM is allowed? What is your view on this? Highlight the issue so that it becomes mainstream. Because believe me, because I work outside of the United States, what we do here in the United States is critically important for a young girl in Iran and Iraq and Pakistan and Afghanistan. So let us question each other's theology, because and the Islamists need to be questioned. There's no doubt about that.
Well, I want to just say, I have to just jump off in just a minute, but I want to just say that, you know, there is a woman who is leading the face of Islamist movement in America in Congress, her name by Ilhan Omar, and she has, exploited this kind of appeasement that too many people in the West have for bad ideas coming from our Muslim communities. And when she was challenged about the issue of FGM, female genital mutilation, she said, "Oh, why do you ask such difficult questions?" You know, and what Zeerah said, we have to ask these difficult questions because it is about universal human rights that we're talking about, not just rights for women in our Muslim communities, but rights for people everywhere. Because ultimately, when we win rights for women in the Muslim community, we win rights for the entire world, and that's what we have to remember. So thank you for allowing me to join you all today. I'm going to just jump off, but it was great to see all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Asra.
Thanks, Asra.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, we don't get to
your
see you.
questions, I think it's so important to, first of all, expose the problem. We don't talk about it enough because there are too many taboos. I mean, the fact that how many Americans know that 500,000 girls in America are at risk of female genital mutilation. They think that this is something that's happening out there. We need to expose the problem. Then we need to educate the masses. We need to empower for change, both from within and from outside. And we can't do this alone. I have always said that, if it is a feminist movement, it needs to involve all feminists, from every life. Caste, creed, color should not be a barrier, is not a barrier. We need to talk about this as a human rights issue, because above and beyond religion are the human rights. And if human rights are being abused in the name of religion, we need to call it out.
Yes.
However, how many venues are there in the international world where these women can address these? You know how difficult it was when I used to talk about female genital mutilation at the United Nations Human Rights Council, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC. They would start banging their pencils on the table. They just don't want to hear about it.
Yeah.
Honor killing. There's a law in Jordan that says that if a man kills a family member for the sake of honor, he will not be prosecuted. So, in Nigeria, it is legal to beat your wife. So we are talking about laws. We are talking about policies that need to change. But first, we have to talk about it.
So, Rahil, the emotions of the woman has been removed. She's been told it is immoral for you to raise these issues. And I think by us coming together and discussing this in the open, it's an invitation for others to join in. And I think we can't do this alone anymore. And people who are on this call, who are not Muslims, please hold us accountable. I love it when somebody holds me accountable, because it makes me become better. That is the spirit of this discussion.
And let's take our first question. Go ahead, Rahil.
Yeah, go ahead.
We can take our first question.
But about yes.
Go ahead.
Over to you, Zudi.
Okay. Our first question is from Ali Parsa. He's an Iranian living in California, a long supporter of the Iranian resistance against the anti-Islamic Iranian regime. And he's supported Muslims for Progressive Values. He asked us about suggestion to unite with other Muslim groups. My 2 cents on that, and I'd like to open it to both of you. There are different groups you can work with, and I think it's very important for us to find like-minded Muslims. That's really what our coalition is all about when it comes to the reform movement. But the one thing that united our reform movement is the fact that our first litmus test is, do they have a public stance against political Islam, the Islamic State, the Sharia state, if you will, and that from that follows everything. So once they make a public stance that a theocratic state that mixes mosque and state is a problem, from that will come equality of men and women, work against misogyny, work against FGM, honor killings, etc. If they don't have that initial filter and they just sort of give lip service to some of their values, but don't put that in the context of working against political Islam or Islamism, it's a problem. Because a good example is Tariq Ramadan. Tariq Ramadan for years was coming across as sort of the modern Islamist, modern reformer, but yet he was, to all of us, we knew he was an Islamist. And he worked with the British government, he worked with the French government, the Swedish government, and was sort of this scholar. Now, after spending 18 months in jail, multiple women have come out saying that he was abusive, a rapist, and other things. I think it sort of shows that the problem there was, here's a guy who is one of the more prolific Islamists in the West, the grandson of the Muslim Brotherhood founder, and yet came out as one of the grossest misogynists that was in hiding, but not to the women that actually were his victims. So what do you think about some of the groups that we could work with or should work with when it comes to working with other Muslim groups? Raheel.
Zudi, when we were setting up the Muslim Reform Movement, and as you know, we were among its founding members, we agreed that all of us have come together. We each have our own organizations. I mean, you have AIFD, I have Muslims Facing Tomorrow, Soraya is involved in her own organization, but we come together in the Muslim Reform Movement because we believe in the mandate. We believe in the mission and the vision, and this is our common cause. Similarly, I agree with you. It was never meant to be a stand-alone movement. We are open to working with anyone who believes the same as us, and we welcome this. So I'm, placed in Toronto, Canada. Here we work with the Iranian resistors of the government who are very, very involved with the movement against the theocracy in Iran and for women's rights. We work for Saudi dissidents. We work in support of the Uyghurs in China. So as long as it fits our mandate, we are willing to spread the word and work with them. It's definitely not about ego or about reinventing the wheel.
But and as
Right.
we said, foundational to this should be the denouncing of Islamism and the Islamists. It's really critical. Otherwise, we're just patching up the cracks, and real change is not happening. Everybody's coming together, singing Kumbaya, but the problem is deeper. You just have to go deeper into places and see the women are really they need us. So to amplify this, we have to go to the root of the cancer, kill the cancer stem cell. Right, Zudi? You're a doctor.
Yes. And actually, speaking of cancer stem cells, I thought in the Me Too movement of 2019 that our work against political Islam would just skyrocket, because I thought a lot of you would start getting a lot more higher profile, and they'd start to really look at what was happening to women in Saudi Arabia and Iran and elsewhere, and yet it seemed to have a firewall where it only applied to the West and America. What happened with the Me Too movement? I'd like both of you to, maybe we'll start with Raheel. What do you think happened with that, and why was it? I wrote a piece here for Arizona's newspaper that was entitled "Me Too Except for Muslims," and what it was about was how the imam, there's a women's lawyers advocate group that is a fantastic, it's not the Muslim Advocates, but another one that actually does behind the scene work with women that are victims of abuse and other aspects. And they had interviewed a number of the women that had complained of abuse by the imam at a mosque here in Scottsdale. And I shared the affidavits of the reports, that's a public report, with the newspaper, and wrote an op-ed about it, and they would not publish it, even though it was titled Me Too. And this was in 2020. Me Too Except for Muslims. What happened?
I agree with you. That is exactly what happened. It became an elitist movement. It was about, an elite group of women in the show business and then in business and so on. From the very beginning, from day one, I asked the question, are you addressing the issues that minority women face, that women in third world countries face? If this is a global movement, of course, you know that the Me Too movement was then picked up locally. In many countries. So India had a Me Too movement, and Pakistan had a Me Too movement. But similarly, they were localized to educated elite women. Our work is not just for those women. I come from a country, from Pakistan, where 75% of the women are illiterate and uneducated and, are kept in utter darkness about their human rights. So they're not going to go out to a rally or a march. They're just surviving. So we need to be their voice, but are we addressing their issues? Are we addressing the forceful conversion of Pakistani Christian women? Are we talking about Hindu women on the border being forcefully converted, raped, forced into marriage? The kind of atrocities that are being committed against the Ahmadiyyas in Pakistan. It's a no-no. It's a taboo. And so this is where it's problematic. The Me Too movement should have been all of us movement, but it was just localized to a group of women in the West.
I just want to, because time is limited, I think Rahil spoke to that. I think what, as Zudi alluded, we have to go deeper to the deepest layer. It's not enough for Muslims to say they are against anti-Semitism. They must point out from where this is coming, which part of which mosque is spreading this, who is the person. So likewise, we need to dwell into a deeper conversation. And my invitation is for us all to get together and hold us accountable.
So Soraya, what you're saying essentially is not just to talk the talk, but to walk the walk.
Yes. We have to just nip it very deep, It's not sufficient to say I'm against anti-Semitism. We have to say, we remember there was a time where the MSA in the mosque in Davis was spreading it. And then there was some incidents in New Jersey. We have to highlight those names and the sources. It's not enough. So going to that deeper level is something that we have to, and we do at the Reform Movement. That is why it has become sacrilegious to talk about this. And we are told it's immoral, to address these issues. But we still continue because we know honesty is at the root of justice.
Before we do our closing thoughts here, I want to just do one more thing. Rahil, and again, I can't talk to this subject, but you both can. Sometimes, and you've all talked about the fact that, and I'm the first to say that the problem is the men in the robes and the beards and the real Neanderthals, contrary to what our current president referred to as Neanderthals. But having said that, as a man, you've all said that sometimes one of the barriers is actually other women. What did you mean by that? And maybe we should talk about that just briefly.
Okay, so now...
Well, you talked about... Sorry.
Go ahead, Rahil.
Soraya, you go ahead.
Okay.
No, please.
Okay, so a few days ago, Switzerland banned the niqab and the face veil. And I am a woman who believes in free choice, but I oppose face covering. But there was a woman on Twitter who was getting into a huge fight with me, It is like, well, it is a woman's issue. I said, no, it's a bigger than that, So women themselves have to get out of themselves, of their own way, so that we can do this work. And they don't see that because they have been, I think, systematically told that piety rests in this thing that you wear around your head. Rahil?
Soraya, you're absolutely right. You see, we are talking about issues of modernity, of liberal values, we are talking about progressive values, and it doesn't sit well with everyone. And so many of the women, especially in our community, are told that, these women are heretics, so, don't listen to them. That is why I find it so important that a lot of the work that I do, for example, has to be within the framework of Islam, so that we can give them that guidance to help them understand that your rights are given, God-given rights. No man needs to grant you those rights. Those are your God-given rights. You don't need permission to drive. You don't need permission to be free. You don't need permission to, cover or uncover your head. So yes, you're right, Sudhi. I find much more support sometimes from the males than I do from the women who have been brainwashed to believe that a woman should think outside the box, should not speak outside the box, and if she does, that she's bordering on the sort of kuffar line, and they be educated. Zudi, we can't hear you. You're muted.
Okay, sorry about that. It went off. Okay, so Hannah was talking about this in the Q&A. She says it's confusing for Westerners because they see powerful Saudi businesswomen like Lubna Olayyan and Rania Nashar in the UAE, and Pakistani female fighter pilots and female leaders of Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia. So why do young Muslim women in the West, seduced by reverse feminism of ISIS, instead of aspiring to follow powerful Muslim women? I think Raheel addressed some of this when you were talking about sort of the elitism. We were all subjected to this interview with the monarchy yesterday with Meghan Markle and Harry, and I sort of tweeted this morning as an Arab. I said, I'm the first to tell you that monarchies are a disaster, and ultimately nobody should have genetic privilege. And I think this is what happens, is that sometimes the women that have genetic privilege in these governments, in these societies, end up making it appear like there's women's rights, when in fact, while the prince's wife might not wear a hijab, they still have very strong laws that abuse women who decide not to wear the hijab. And, I think there's sort of this layered society with the Islamist laws applying just to the general population and not to the royal families.
You're absolutely right. For the grassroots, it's still a challenge. Look at what happened in Pakistan. We did have a female prime minister, Benazir Bhutto, but then she was brutally shot and killed to set an example, to say that this is what happens when women come into leadership. I believe very strongly that that was the message that was being given, that women should not be in leadership. So, few and far between, whereas in the entire Muslim world, there are millions of women who are capable, who are educated, who are visionary, and who could take on leadership roles. But if a Muslim woman takes on a leadership role, she's looked upon as being militant. And so by the Islamists and the general male population. So it's not something that's encouraged. And I've always believed that in the Muslim world, the patriarchy wants women to be uneducated, especially about their religious rights, because an educated woman is a weapon against them. There is nothing that scares ISIS and the Taliban more than a woman with a book. We saw that with Malala Yousafzai. And, an educated woman is a threat. So in Afghanistan, they constantly burn down women's girls' schools. I was reading a statistic that said they have burnt down 750 girls' schools. They build a school for girls and they burn it down. They do not want women to be educated. They would rather keep them ignorant so that they don't know their rights, and therefore they remain in this passive state.
And
Does that make sense?
Yes, and I think we cannot overlook the fact that what the monarchies and their monies, especially Saudi funding, had the impact it had on all these on the Muslims worldwide. For instance, I work in Sri Lanka. They funded the largest Sharia university in Sri Lanka. Why do we need a Sharia university? Sharia is all man-made law that is very regressive and abusive and towards women. So this had a huge role to play, and we have to really undo some of the damage, and that's going to take time.
So thank you for your time, and I want to let you guys let you both close it, and then I'll give some parting comments for our audience. So let me start with Raheel, if you want to give some closing comments, and then Soraya.
You know, my message to women all over the world and men as well today is that, yes, it's International Women's Day, but let's not forget those women who don't have a voice. It's so important to be a voice for the women who are not part of such movements. And, you know, unless all women have equal freedom, the equity and the equality, we can't really begin to celebrate. So, you know, I'm thinking of the women who are incarcerated, who are jailed, who are subject to abuse and violence and forced and underage marriage. The list goes on and on. And I don't want to be dry and dreary. Women have come a long way as well. But we're living in the 21st century. We've got to have more. And so when those women come up to that level, I will be the first one to celebrate.
I think also that in this journey of social activism and justice for Muslim women particularly, the strongest message is we have to keep on keeping on. Things won't happen overnight. And women everywhere, my message is believe that you are way more powerful than you think you are. You have been told you are not powerful. So speak up. And remember, as Melinda Gates said, a woman with a voice is a powerful woman, and the Muslim community needs you.
Thank you. And I could not have said it any better myself. I am humbled by being your partners in this journey in the Muslim reform movement in each of our organizations. I want to thank Esra Nomani, Raheel Raza, and Soraya Dean for helping open the eyes of everybody to some of these issues. We will have more webinars over the next few weeks and months. If you sign up for this one, you will get requests for future webinars. Please share it with your friends. Find us on social media, on Twitter, Facebook, and on our website at muslimreformmovement.org. And each of our organizations also has websites. Engage us. You know, as we see governors of certain states with individuals that are coming out that have been clearly abused or sexually harassed, that we wonder why the same standard isn't applied to Muslim women in mosques and organizations, and yet we seem to just sort of have a bigotry of low expectations. So on this International Women's Day, we ask you to see a solution not only for Muslim women, but I'm here to tell you that if you solve the problem with misogyny in the Muslim community, you will also defeat radicalization, terrorism, political Islam, and begin to change governments from Iran to Afghanistan to Egypt and on, because it comes together, it all runs together. So thank you for joining us on this webinar. This will be available online indefinitely as a video for you to share for those of your friends that weren't able to join us today. Raheel, Soraya, Esra, thank you. God bless.
Thank you.